Intelligence Medal, Legion of Merit, 2 Oak Leaf Cluster. In 1980, the National Armed Services Award presented by the Veterans of Foreign Wars. After his retirement from the military in '76, General Graham became a research professor at the University of Miami. He served as military advisor to President Ronald Reagan, or at that time, in '76 and '80 on his presidential campaigns. In '78, General Graham left the university to become co-chairman of the Coalition for Peace Through Strength. In 1981, he founded and became director of High Frontier, which brought out the idea of the Strategic Defense Initiative. He's also chairman of the Coalition for SDI and the Space Transportation Association. For those of you who have been watching the news, he just recruited his newest member to High Frontier, Boris Yeltsin, president of Western. And he's here today to speak on Space Policy 2000, the SDIO's Strategic Defense Initiative Office's efforts to reduce launch costs. Let's warm welcome to General Graham.
Well, thanks a lot. I never dreamed that I'd leave Washington with 5 inches of snow and come out and catch cold in San Diego, but I managed to do that. I want to talk to you about space policy, and a couple of the previous speakers that I listened to gave me some launch points. There is an absolute requirement, and maybe given recent events an opportunity to meet that challenge. There's an absolute requirement to get hold of a space policy that really works. Too often, space enthusiasts like you and me, we say, boy, wouldn't it be great to do X, Y, and Z, you know, go to Mars or something on that order, and first time around as an idea, the Congress nods like a tree full of owls, say that's a great idea. And somebody comes in and I tell you what's going to cost, and they say, no way. I think most of you know that the real problem in cost is primarily the enormous cost of launch. It just costs us too much to launch them. And before we can ever get to doing things practical in space, we've got to cut down the car fare. Somehow, those men and machines have got to get into space at less cost. Because of that problem, I think, or viewing the problem for what it really is, allows us to think of a space policy that can be connected to something from which, as was mentioned earlier this morning, the investor, that is Mr. Taxpayer, gets a return on his investment. For a long time, we could support space programs on the basis of psychic reward. It just made us feel good. We were equipping the Russians at something. And that was a very important one, the challenge of that other bunch over there, the Soviet Union. Then we had some other sort of subsidiary reasons for doing it, which was scientific knowledge, the challenge of it all. All those things tended to net together in such a way as you could get sufficient public support, to get sufficient congressional support to have a reasonably good space program. And sometimes a spectacularly good space program, which is the Apollo program. But these imperatives just don't hold up today. First of all, we've whipped the Russians, and there's no reason. You can't get people to say, well, we must do it for national prestige purposes anymore. We got more national prestige than we know what to do with. Now that the Soviets have folded. And we can't replace that with some nice idealistic thing like, well, let's just do it internationally on some kind of a multinational basis for the good of all mankind, a sort of idealistic internationalization of the original uh, nationalistic reason for taking money away from the taxpayer, putting it into space. That doesn't work anymore. That there is not nearly as much punch in let's join hands with the Russians and go to Mars than there would be in let's beat the Russians to Mars. Believe me. The first one is not going to get you any money to go to Mars. The second one, let's beat the Russians, could get you money to go to Mars. Let's join hands with the Russians and go to Mars, and going to get you a dime. So you need to get practical. The other kind of imperatives, such as scientific knowledge. Well, sure, and particularly the scientific community loves this business about scientific knowledge. So give us the money so that we learn more things about space. That's okay. I'm for that. But let's talk about Joe Sixpack out there who's had money taken out of his wages for this, who tells these congressmen how to vote. Or at least he elects them. If you said to the average American, we're going to spend X billion dollars on research. Now, here are your choices. We research cancer, it's cancer research or space exploration. I know where everybody in this room probably would vote. Let's go for space. But I tell you, that's not the case out there among the rest of the people. They'll say, hands down, cancer research. Because everybody's grandma or somebody has had cancer, and they, by George, that's where they wanted to go. So that, the search for knowledge is not a strong enough breed to hang up space programs. What about the challenge of it all? That's another thing that we often use to sell our space programs. Well, it's out there. It's like Mount Everest. You know, it's there. You got to do it. But you know, when Hillary climbed Mount Everest, it's true. Millions of people cheered. Good for Hillary. But I'll tell you something. Many more millions could have cared less. And it was a tiny handful of people that paid the bill for Hillary to go to Everest. The challenge is a great, noble-sounding thing, but by George, it doesn't put money into the space program very well. So, where do we go? Those of us who still think that space is the future. I tell you where you go. You go to some space program shaped around the notion that we're going to return something to you, dear taxpayer, for helping the space program. We're going to have programs that are going to either put money in your pocket or make you feel more secure. We're going to use space to defend you, like SDI, or we're going to use space to create jobs and make profit. So it's good for the economy, therefore good for you. You get a return on your investment. Not psychic reward, something palatable, something you can touch, feel, and see. That brings you to the point where what you have to do now is something that is very annoying to our intellectual elites. You got to get the merchants and soldiers involved strongly in the space business, just like we had to do with any other frontier that ever had to be conquered. At some point, it wasn't Kit Carson, you know, it wasn't Lewis and Clark. It was a bunch of people whose names we don't know, who happened to be merchants and soldiers. The only ones you hear about are guys who get whipped, like Custer. It reminds me, my old man was an Army troop for a long time. He said that the only trouble with the U.S. Army was that when Custer took off from Fort Lincoln to go up to the Little Bighorn, he said, "Don't change anything till I get back." Well, you know, if there's profit to be made out there, and we have to have some kind of imperative that gets behind our space program, that gets enough people enthusiastic about it, that Congress will spend the money right and give space its due. We have to figure out, well, what could that be? Well, there are a couple of things, there are a couple of developments, I think, now that are such that we could peg space programs with a return on investment. One of them is and I think it's one of the most important space programs we've got going now is SDI. What's the return? The return is the feeling of security. Are the American people interested in this? You bet they are. They're more interested in it than they know. Because half the people in this country believe that we could stop a ballistic missile if we fired at us. And the minute you convince them that that ain't so, there's nothing you can do to stop a ballistic missile, and the darn things are spreading all over the world, then they say, well, for crying out loud, do something about it. So can you get support for that space program? You betcha. I've been doing it now for 10 years, and I know it's there. There is support for using space for security purposes. And in today's world, you've got a chance to be really grand statesman about all this. You've got NATO, which is an interesting phenomenon, which was very helpful during the Cold War. It's still over there. It's an institution one might like to keep together, at least I would. So what do? You give them the mission of coordinating the defense, the spaceborne, U.S. spaceborne defense with all these ground-based systems that are coming up all over the world, and now NATO has a mission. And it is a mission into which they can pull East Europeans in a sort of an association with NATO. You could even reach out and grab the Russians and pull them in an association with NATO to create what Boris Yeltsin was. That's why I got my vote for Boris Yeltsin. I got the Shaposhnikov, he sold it to Yeltsin. That you have a defensive system that doesn't just defend the United States, it defends Europe, defends even the Soviet Union, and anybody who wants to fire a missile in anger or even by mistake is likely to get shot down, and shot down by not just a dear old US SDI, but a sort of a broad internationalized SDI. There is a program worth, I think, anybody's support, and I think it is a space program of grand import. The second sort of thing that is happening is more and more evidence coming up that one way or another you can use the lunar surface to produce energy. Whether you go the helium-3 route for fusion, or whether you go for large solar arrays to collect solar energy and beam them back, I think the beam holding and the photovoltaic technology is moving well. I don't know where that helium-3 thing is going to go, but I have got glowing reports from some scientists and skepticism from others. But either one or the other may make the lunar surface a place where we should, in fact, send people to first to construct and then to tend systems that will return energy to the Earth. Now, particularly if helium-3 works out, if that fusion system works out, it would be worth the trip and the effort on the moon to collect 1 ton of helium-3 from the regolith of the moon, because that would be worth $4 billion. I mean, talk about a Sutter's Mill. And then things really get started out in space when you've got something to do. Everybody in the L5 Society that I've known, they all want to get out there and get some people out there, not astronauts, but, you know, real people. And, my friends, they're going to get out there, not just to be there. People are going to be out in space when there's something for them to do. When there's a job out there to be done, that's when people will go to space. So I think we can look at the moon now, and we could set a national goal to say, one of the things we want to do, get to the moon and start, and one way or another, return to the Earth something the Earth dearly needs, is some way to resupply the energy resources we keep burning up down here on Earth. We could even get the environmentalists to go along, I think, because plowing up the surface of the moon is really not going to destroy the view. So Jerry Purnell once said that if you want to do strip mining, that's the place to do it. Nobody's really going to notice the stars. So, are there return on investment bases for a space policy? You bet there are. In the short term, security, and a second very important thing, which I'll get to in a minute, opening up space for really commercial operations. private space operations as opposed to all government. There's a short-term effort that can be made. And the long-term, let's see what we can do to get the necessary transportation machinery and the basic research done so that we can use the moon as a source of energy. And the taxpayer gets his return on investment. Now let me talk to the one that I just skipped over lightly, and that is commercialization in space. Now, I remember 10 years ago when we did the first iFrontier report, we go around and talk to industry people, and several industries had some things that they said that they would do in space, but only if the cost per pound to orbit or the cost per mission dropped off sharply. Well, how do you make the cost per mission drop off sharply? Well, I think we can. And once again, you got to thank God that there's a military around to get it going right. At least part of the military to get it going right. So in February 1989, I pushed almost all the blue chips I had with Danny Quayle across the table to get him interested in one particular development. And this was development that had was briefed to me first by a man in his room, Max Hunter, and then I heard him defend it against a bunch of skeptical engineers who got won over that it could be done. And that was what we called then the spaceship experimental, and what is called now the single-stage orbit vehicle. It made so much sense to me, and it would so revolutionize what we do in space. It would take care of such problems as commercialization, take care of deploying military systems, and in the long run, take care of missions to the moon and beyond, because you so radically reduce the cost of getting mass into LEO. And all of these costs all of these efforts that we think about in space, except well, even including mechanical explorations, planetary probes and so forth, are the key to doing them well is how much it costs to get pounds into LEO. And I became convinced this is the way to do it. So Max Hunter and I and Jerry Purnell went to Quayle's office, and we said, this is the way it ought to be done. Quayle was a little astonished. I think he thought I wanted to come up and tell him that I didn't want John Tower to be Secretary of Defense, which I didn't. But that so Quayle was interested. And if we saw any interest on his part, by the way, we told him the place that ought to run this is SDIO. Now this might sound a little strange to you, but we're not stupid. We may be a little brash. We didn't want to take an idea like this, put it in NASA where it would be crushed because it was an opponent to Shuttle C. We didn't want to put it in the Air Force where it'd be crushed because it was a rival to the ALS. We had to put it somewhere where the poor baby give a chance to get a few breaths, because we thought it would be technically such a stout baby that once you get it alive, the thing would live. If you let it live a little while, it would live a long time. Well, so we went then to George Monahan, who was running SDIO, and we said, George, how do you like these apples? He said, that's great. He'd already gotten a call from Quayle, so no wonder he said it was great. But he had his own reasons. SDI's requirements for space left were part of the reason they were going for ALS. SDI's requirements was allegedly for a 120,000 pound chunk of laser battle station, and that was one of the things that was driving the Air Force requirement for lift. But they had finally adopted first what we proposed iFrontier in the first place, which was smart rocks, and they outdid us and got brilliant pebbles, and the requirement for lift for both weight and cube was dropping like a rock, while poor old SDIO was having to contribute money and effort to ALS, which they needed like a hole in the head. So Monahan was happy then to say, yeah, we'll take this on. So, to make a long story short, it got there. And now, then what happened? Well, pretty soon they let an RFP to 4 company, 4 teams, 4 aerospace teams, Boeing, Rockwell, MacDac, and GD, and these guys did great work. Now, I'm really quite sorry that you didn't get 2 competitive efforts going, but they didn't have quite enough money. They got enough to keep one going, so MacDac got the deal. Now, MacDac is developing the Delta Clipper. Now, and that was what we called an SSX, which now called a single-stage orbit vehicle. And they're doing great. The Max is helping them, of course, trying to keep from making mistakes. They're going to make some anyway, Max. But the reason they're doing well is because their government boss, the office that bosses them in Washington, consists of 1 Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and 1 Air Force Major, period. And that's a $60 million program. Now, I was hoping that the gentleman from GD was still here, because I hate to criticize anything he said when he's not here. But those of you who listen to him on the National Launch System, recall he said that, well, the Air Force is paying for about 2/3 of it, and NASA is paying for about 1/3 of an $84 million program this year. Supervising from the Air Force side is 75 people. I don't know how many are on the NASA side, but I'll bet you it's over 100 people going to supervise this thing. And that's why SSTO is going to go like gangbusters, and the National Launch System is going to fall on its face. You don't need 2 or 3 GS-16s to look over the shoulder of every engineer that's working on these projects. And the fewer you get, the better off. And that is why SSTO is going great at MacDac. And you never saw such a happy bunch of engineers in your life as those guys that are working on it. Because the government hadn't got enough horsepower to screw them up. Well, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about in terms of technology, what are we talking about in SSTO? I've got a very short film here that we made that shows the SSX, as we'll say SSX, because that's what we're peddling. I need the technical assistance up here. What do I just punch start? Play button on there. Let's see if technology serves. Is the power on the TV? It's black. Well, let's see if we get this thing working. I'll tell you this much. When I was at MacDac in St. Louis and they were briefing the NASP to me, and thank God for the NASP, because as this film will show you, if it hadn't been for technology developed in NASP, we would have had a lot harder time selling this program to anyone. Uh-oh, he's pulling things apart. I'm afraid we're not going to see the film. But after the brief, the MacDac engineers showed me a model of their version at that time of an NASP. And it had a rather strange shape, I thought. And they said, well, we call this flying shoehorn.
Okay. We have audio now.
All right, now we'll try it.
Right.
I call that the flying suppository.
From the beginning of the space race, it has been recognized that rockets will provide the power to put mankind and his machines into space. However, these great engines were first of all ammunition, and therefore all space transport was essentially modified munitions. One of the problems with ammunition is that once the trigger is pulled, in this case when the rockets are ignited, an unalterable chain of events is set in motion that will result in triumph or failure. We cannot take these rockets up a short distance and set down. We cannot test fly them as we do airplanes. It either works or fails totally. Because success depends on each rocket component functioning perfectly, thousands of highly paid technicians are required to check, double-check, and triple-check every nut, bolt, and transistor. Since a rocket failure means almost certain loss of vehicle and its payload, insurance rates are preposterously large. Even when these rockets work well, there is another costly problem. To get a useful payload into space, it was necessary to discard pieces of the vehicle en route. Making these rockets, and even the shuttle, resemble disintegrating totem poles. These are the key reasons why the modified ammunition used for space transport costs so much. The cost on a per-pound basis to place payload in low Earth orbit is well over $7,800 for the shuttle, and more than $5,400 for expendable vehicles. The Spaceship Experimental, or SSX, shows great promise of overcoming these problems and reducing the cost per pound of orbiting payload by 2 orders of magnitude to $50 per pound or less. This is done by creating a rocket that starts out as transportation, not ammunition. It is a single-stage to orbit vehicle that is tested and operated in the same manner as an airplane, without an airplane's wings. It can be partially fueled, lift off, and sit back down vertically, much as our moon landing vehicles of the Apollo program. Tests can be made to hundreds or thousands of feet in the development process, much as one would flight test an aircraft. The mission profile of SSX is vertical takeoff from the launch pad, followed by insertion into Earth orbit. In space, the SSX coasts and maneuvers as required to perform its mission, such as inserting a satellite. To land, the SSX does a pitch-over maneuver to drop speed. Air brakes on re-entry, and performs a cross-range maneuver, reducing to landing speed with rockets. Then touching down on tripod landing gear. If an emergency arises during ascent, the SSX will either hover, dump fuel, and return to its original launch port, or if well down range, land at an alternate site. This vehicle is totally savable, and the risk of catastrophic failure is reduced to that experienced with aircraft. Since the entire craft returns intact, the checkout, refurbishing, and maintenance crew is reduced to a few hundred people, as opposed to almost 10,000 for the shuttle. Controlled vertical takeoff and landing and engine lock safety are made possible by multiple thrusters along the edge of the broad base of the conical ship. If thrust is lost on one side, it is automatically compensated for by increasing or decreasing thrust elsewhere. It has long been recognized that spaceships of this basic design would be optimum for both manned and unmanned operations. The problem was that we could not make a ship strong enough to carry its own fueled weight, and yet be light enough to permit its weight with landing fuel and payload to reach orbit and return. Work on the National Aerospace plane has essentially solved this fundamental problem. Materials developed for this program by a 5-company consortium are light enough to build the SSX. The Spaceship Experimental, SSX, is now a viable concept. If successful, it should provide for manned and unmanned space transport available at such reasonable cost that the United States will again be undisputed master of space, and the dreams of millions of space enthusiasts will become reality.
Now, if you want to ask some technical questions, well, first of all, if you want to see what the bird looks like now, just look at what was handed out by NSS and the L5 to you in your packages. There's a picture there of how MacDAC views this bird now. It's a lot prettier than our little job here we used to illustrate the concept. Now, we're not talking about flying one of these things in the year 2002. We're talking about flying the first of the SSTO vehicles in 429 days. Now, it'll be a suborbital flight of a, is it 1/3, 2/3 scale, right? 1/3 scale vehicle. Because you have to test out whether we're crazy or not, you know, whether you can actually, or whether Max Hunter's crazy, actually. He says he's crazy, but the vehicle doesn't know. It'll work anyway. But at any rate, you've got to see whether you can do these maneuvers and get the thing to sit down on its tail. Now, of course, when we came up with this idea, the people who like wings on things a little shocked. I went talking to Deke Slayton one time, and he said, well, you know how many pounds of fuel you'd have to take up in that thing in order to break your fall when you come back down and land? I said, yeah, I said, but I figure it won't weigh as much as the wings and tails and landing gear that you need on wing vehicles. And he thought about that and well, yeah, maybe, he said. No, it's going to cause a cultural shock to the whole space community. When that little bird flies in 429 days, that's April 23rd, that's scheduled. Now, cuts are done. That's going to cause a shock. Now, one of the things it's going to cause, I believe, now I'm speculating, this is sort of a swag, scientific wild-ass guess, but that the commercial people, that entrepreneurs, financial people will say, wow, that thing works and you can go to orbit with it, or even if you can use it in suborbital deliveries of things fast, there is a market somewhere for that, and I'll put some money in it. And this flight is likely to get to start us down the trail of getting the Union Pacific to space. Not NASA, not necessarily Vandenberg, not necessarily Cape Kennedy, but Arkansas, Oregon, wherever. Because, you notice we're not throwing any pieces away. So you don't have to worry about dropping chunks of rocket on folks. You don't have to be over near the coast. And if your failure rate is about the same as aircraft, well, nobody objects to having an airfield around. So, and then think what we can do with Congress. I mean, we can bribe the bastard. You could say, well, we will support a spaceport in your neck of the woods if you vote right. Okay. Now this is what Bob Walker was talking about this morning. One of the problems is that I won't use bad language anymore. You can keep it. What he was talking about is free space enterprise zones in the state. Well, how are you going? You can't do that with things that have to be launched from Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg. You can't do that, but you can sure do it if you have this bird. So think of the difference in what may happen to the commercial world when you finally have got those costs down to the point where you could put tourists in space. There's not anybody, I don't know anybody in this room who's rich. If there is somebody rich enough to go up at $10,000 a pound, I want to see him to make a donation to High Frontier. I dare say none of us got that kind of money. But at $50 a pound, now I bet you there are a lot of people in this room would say, you bet you weigh me, or you'd go on a diet. And off we go, right? This tourism, I think, may be the sort of hidden market out. It actually isn't too hidden, as people have thought about it before and got quite a response and sold tickets. This can be done, but we certainly aren't going to get I hope we don't get the government into the tourist business. What we need is a private company doing it. And there are private companies interested. And this is one of the reasons why I put together the Space Transportation Association. And any of you that are interested in getting our materials and so forth, let us know. We have two publications. Well, actually, we have 3 publications out of my various outfits. One of them is the High Frontier News Watch. It's primarily on the SDI question. And then I've got the Space Transportation Association newsletter, which is all about space transportation. And then I've got the Journal of Practical Applications in Space. And that's where we like to get ideas from anybody. And so long as it seems practical, we put it out for peer review. It's practical, we'll print it for you. We've got quite a distribution. So any of you who are interested in getting into print with your smart idea and want to risk us saying that peer review says it's a lousy idea, you send it in. We'll publish it. Alita Jackson, so I know a lot of you know, L5ers would know Alita Jackson. She's my editor. And we'll get it in print. We say Journal of Practical Applications in Space because we're practical people. I think the SSTO is just as practical as anything that ever came down the pipe. I think SDI is practical. So we promote practical things. We're not very much interested in little gray men, little green men, but we are interested in seeing space move forward, and we're interested in seeing space become an area of human activity and profitable human activity. We're interested in seeing the American taxpayer who has to foot the bill for all this get some return on his investment. For that reason, we have a space policy paper. There are about 20 copies here. If anybody wants a copy of all this great wisdom. It's here. This is a living paper. We're getting criticisms from everywhere on what is said in here, and we're adjusting it. We're not stiff-backed, but read it. If you got good comment on it, send it in. We'll consider it. We also we reserve the right to reject it, but we'll consider it. Well, that's what I have to say about space. I think that space is the future, but I think it is not. That future is not going to get here very fast unless we find out some way to reward the poor devil whom we're asking to pay for it. Thank you very much. SDI, what came to be known SDI concept. And the old man took out his 3x5 cards and was writing down stuff and asking me questions. I was overrunning the time, but it allotted me something specific, like 11 and a half minutes to do my thing. And Dick Allen and Casey and all those guys are on it. I'm going to say, shut up, Governor. I mean, my time is up. I'll see you later and all. So I know when the old man got interested. And that all he needed, and it did happen a couple of weeks before he made that speech, was for the Joint Chiefs of Staff to come in and tell him what they did tell him in late February. Said, yes, you know, we can do this, and we probably ought to do this, and then he made his decision. So Reagan was only waiting for somebody, for his experts to say, yes, this is possible. And believe me, that was not easy to get done, because the Pentagon fought me for a whole year from 81, March 81 through March 82, fighting like tigers, trying not to do this. Understandably, because nobody in the military had the mission of stopping ballistic missiles. Why are we going to put any money on that? The Army has to have tanks, the Air Force has to have airplanes, the Navy has to have ships. Who needs all this stuff? I mean, we're having trouble enough getting all the money we want for other things. So, no, it wasn't that he just did it out of fear of Cardinal Bernardine. I went up and talked to him up in Chicago. He, nice fella, but he sure doesn't know what he's talking about in military matters. Yeah.
What do the Russians fit into their technology and the changes that are taking place over there? Should they be using it here?
Where do the Russians fit in? Well, I think the main thing the Russians have got, and they've got this kind of expertise across the board in things technical, and that is theoretical expertise. The problem with the Soviets has always been turning theory into practice. So we should tap Soviet brain power, you know, greedily. As far as Soviet machinery is concerned, the problem with using energia or a large number of the excess vehicles that they're going to have, you know, assuming that you're going to knock off a bunch of SS-18 missiles, is that you can smother your own industry by allowing them to grab too much of the market. As of right now, that's more of a menace to the French and their Ariane than it is to us, because we have a law that says you can't launch an American satellite on a Soviet booster, or even a satellite that's got American components on cannot be launched on a Soviet booster. And now the booster people think that's great. The satellite people are not so sure, and I don't know how that's going to wind up. But I know that making it free and easy to use the Soviet boosters is going, I think, will be damaging to our own launch industries. So my inclination right now is to keep that restriction about the satellites on. And that means that we can't really do too much with energy. Yeah.
I wanted to know if you had any policy at all on education.
They go into civil, marine, merchant marine activity, actually, non-government. They wind up with a reserve commission in the Navy in case we ever need those rascals. You know, Christmas out, Russians. But that sort of thing I think should be done. And I think that, I really believe that once you got something going like that, and where anybody that came into an entering freshman would have to be computer literate before you ever let him in the place, and you could take foreign students and so forth. But I think if you got an institution like that going on space matters, that where all the courses taken were pointed in the direction of space. I mean, perhaps instead of Robert Louis Stevenson, they would read Robert Heinlein.